What if one tiny mistake could rewrite the story of your entire life? On a cool Boston morning, a woman named Claire Bennett, brilliant, composed, and quietly broken after a divorce, hit send on the wrong email. Attached was not a document, but a single photograph, a simple, sunlit moment by Walden Pond, sent accidentally to Ethan Whitmore, the most feared and untouchable CEO in the city. What happens when perfection collides with vulnerability? When a man who built his world on control receives a glimpse of honesty too pure to ignore, and when two people each hiding behind walls of duty and regret are forced to face what their hearts have long denied. From that single mistake begins a journey through rumor, redemption, and the quiet rebirth of love. A story not about luxury or scandal, but about courage, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, and the second chances that find us when we least expect them. So, grab your tea, settle in, and let's step into the secretary who accidentally sent a private photo to a millionaire CEO, and his reaction changed everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another story that reminds us how the smallest moments can change everything. Boston woke to a crisp October morning, the kind where the air smelled faintly of maple leaves and the Charles River shimmered like glass. From the 40th floor windows of Whitmore and Lane LLP, the city looked serene, almost suspended in time. Inside, the rhythm was different phones ringing, printers humming, the low murmur of law clerks already buried in paperwork. At precisely 7:45 a.m., Claire Bennett stepped out of the elevator. Her shoes made soft, quick clicks on the polished marble floor. Everything about her moved with quiet certainty, the way she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, the way her leather portfolio rested neatly against her side. She was known for calm precision, for never being late, never forgetting a name, never spilling a drop of coffee on a document. Yet beneath that poised exterior was a woman quietly rebuilding herself. 2 years earlier, a divorce had split her life into before and after. She kept the before in boxes inside a storage unit on the south end of the city. The after she carried carefully each day into this tower of glass and steel, where order could mask the loneliness that sometimes caught her by surprise. Her small office faced east. Sunlight spilled across her desk, illuminating the steam from a mug of Earl Grey. She set down her phone, opened the firm's calendar, and began sorting through meeting notes for Ethan Whitmore, the CEO. To most employees, Whitmore was an institution calm, reserved, intimidating in his flawless gray suits. To Claire, he was also a puzzle. She'd worked with him for almost 3 years and still couldn't decide whether the distance he kept was armor or emptiness. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lily Monroe, her best friend since college, now a reporter traveling across New England. Morning, sunshine. Look what I found. Walden Pond at dawn. I thought of you. Attached was a photo mist rising from the still water, a rowboat floating near the dock. Claire smiled. That place had been her refuge last weekend, a rare escape from the office. She'd gone alone, walked the wooden paths, and asked a stranger to take a picture of her near the lake. In it, she wore jeans, a simple sweater, hair pulled into a ponytail. Nothing glamorous, just honest, a woman breathing again. She wanted to reply with her own snapshot, the one she had taken just before sunset, her bare feet touching the water's edge, ripples widening under the light. It wasn't revealing, just personal, the kind of picture you'd send a friend when words failed to explain peace. Claire tapped share, scrolled to Lily Monroe, typed, "This was the same day. Felt like my first real breath in months." Then, without realizing, her thumb brushed the wrong line on the screen. A single soft whoosh confirmed the send. She set the phone down, reached for her tea, and opened the day's schedule. Meetings, contracts, the steady hum of order. It wasn't until the phone blinked again that something in her chest tightened. The name at the top of the screen read Ethan Whitmore. For a moment, she didn't breathe. The words blurred. She blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light. Message sent to Ethan Whitmore. Her heartbeat thudded so loud she could almost hear it echo off the glass walls. No, no, no. No. She snatched the phone, opened the thread. There it was, her photo, the lake, her feet in the rippling water, her message about my first real breath. No subject line, no explanation, sent directly to the man whose reputation for detachment was legendary. A flush crept up her neck. "Oh, God," she whispered, pressing a hand to her forehead. In her mind, she saw Ethan sitting at his desk, calm, unreadable, that faint furrow between his brows when something caught him off guard. What would he think? That she was careless, unprofessional, trying to be personal? She stood so fast the chair rolled back. Undo, undo, she muttered, tapping the screen. But the option had already faded. The message was gone, delivered, digital, irreversible. Outside her door, the corridor was alive with morning bustle. Associates hurried past carrying case files. The scent of fresh brewed coffee drifted from the break room. Everything looked normal, yet Claire felt suspended in panic, like the world had tilted and she was the only one who noticed. She forced herself to breathe. He probably hasn't seen it yet, she reasoned. He's in a meeting. Maybe it'll get buried under other emails. Maybe he'll delete it without opening. But the thought of Ethan opening that photo of him seeing her bare feet touching the water, reading that quiet confession about peace made her stomach twist. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was real, and real was dangerous in this place. Her mind raced through options. She could send a follow-up apology. She could pretend it never happened. She could hand in her resignation before he even mentioned it. Each idea felt worse than the last. A soft chime broke the silence. The elevator at the end of the corridor opened with a muted ding. Claire froze. Footsteps steady. Deliberate approached. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. The energy in the hallway shifted whenever Ethan Whitmore appeared, as though even the air remembered to stand straighter. He passed by slowly, nodding greetings to two partners. When he reached her office doorway, she rose automatically. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice came out too bright. "Morning, Claire." Just her name. Simple. Controlled. His green-gray eyes flicked over her face, calm. Unreadable, but lingered a fraction longer than usual. He gave a small nod and continued down the hall toward his corner suite. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Maybe he hadn't seen it yet. Maybe he never would. Still. Her pulse refused to slow. She sat, pressed her palms together, whispered a silent prayer to the gods of technology and human forgetfulness. Through the glass wall, she could see his reflection, a tall figure in charcoal, setting his briefcase down, opening his laptop. A moment later, his head tilted slightly, the faintest pause. Then his gaze lifted toward the window, toward her office across the corridor. Their eyes met. Just for a second that stretched far too long. Claire looked away first, heat rising in her face. She focused on the computer screen, on anything ordinary, the blinking cursor, the list of court filings, the hum of the HVAC system, normal, professional, composed. But inside, every nerve felt exposed, raw, electric. Outside, the city carried on traffic crawling along Beacon Street, a church bell marking 8 o'clock, a gull circling above the harbor. Inside, one woman sat frozen at her desk, her life as precisely arranged as ever, except for one impulsive tap of her finger that had just changed everything. On her phone screen, the message glowed quietly. Final, merciless message sent to Ethan Whitmore from the 42nd floor. Boston looked like a painting crisp autumn air, sunlight glinting off the river, streaks of gold cutting across the skyline. Inside his glass-walled office, Ethan Whitmore sat in his high-backed chair, posture straight, tie perfectly aligned. The hum of the city below was muted here, replaced by the faint tick of the clock and the quiet whir of the air vent. His mornings were rituals of control, the same coffee, the same news brief, the same silence. Then the sound broke ping, a new message sliding into his inbox. He clicked it without looking at the sender. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. The image filled the screen, Claire Bennett, standing by the edge of a lake, sunlight spilling across her hair, the rippled water catching the reflection of her bare feet. There was nothing staged, nothing deliberate, just life, caught mid-breath. The caption below read, "This was the same day. Felt like my first real breath in months." Ethan's breath caught. He should have deleted it immediately. It was an accident, obviously, but something in that single line pierced the armor he'd worn for years. My first real breath in months. It sounded like something he understood all too well. He leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. For 6 years since his wife's death, he had lived as if grief were an office policy. Keep your head down. Meet the deadline. Feel nothing. People admired his composure, called it strength. In truth, it was just quiet survival. Now, a photo innocent, simple had cracked that silence open. He studied the image longer than he should have, eyes drawn not to the shape of her, but to the warmth of her expression, to the way the light made her look free. Something inside him stirred, half ache, half wonder. What have you done? Claire Bennett, he thought. A knock on the door snapped him back. Come in. Adam Pierce stepped inside, portfolio under his arm, confidence in every stride. Adam was the firm's rising star, brilliant, hungry, and entirely aware of it. Morning, sir, he said, flashing a practiced smile. I have the Morrison contract updates. Ethan closed the email with one swift motion. The screen turned sterile again. Spreadsheets, clauses, the safe world of precision. Leave them on the desk, Ethan said. Adam set the folder down, but didn't leave. His gaze flicked toward the glass wall overlooking the office floor. Big week ahead. The press is watching the firm again. They always are, Ethan replied. Adam's grin sharpened. True, some of them think you're grooming Claire for management. She's talented, sure, but it's rare for assistants to sit in on senior reviews. His tone was light, but the undercurrent wasn't. Ethan didn't flinch. Miss Bennett sits in because she understands context. She anticipates before others do. Efficiency, not favoritism. Of course, Adam said smoothly, but his eyes glittered with curiosity. Just wanted to make sure the perception stays clean. He turned and left, leaving a faint trace of cologne and calculation behind. When the door shut, Ethan stared at the empty doorway. He knew that look ambition disguised as concern, and he knew how rumors could twist truth faster than any headline. One photo, even innocent, could become ammunition. He reopened the email one last time, as if to memorize what had already become a risk. Then he deleted it, the screen asking, "Are you sure?" before the image vanished into digital ether, but the picture remained printed somewhere behind his eyes. Across the corridor, Claire was living her own version of torment. She tried to bury herself in tasks, drafting memos, organizing case files, taking calls, but her mind replayed the same question on loop. Did he see it every time the phone buzzed or an email arrived with his name? Her heart jumped. When she went to deliver a report mid-morning, she passed his office. The glass walls made it impossible to hide. Ethan sat there, posture composed, reviewing papers. For a second, she saw the side of his face calm, distant, carved in discipline, no trace of recognition. Maybe that was mercy. She turned quickly, nearly colliding with Adam. Easy there, he said with a grin. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just busy morning, Claire replied, forcing a polite smile. Adam tilted his head, studying her. Busy seems to follow you. Guess the CEO likes having you around. It wasn't the words that stung, but the implication behind them. She gave a tight nod. Mr. Whitmore values efficiency. Sure, he said lightly. And you're efficient. His tone made her stomach tighten. She stepped aside, letting him walk past, then took the long route back to her desk. By noon, the office had settled into its usual rhythm, but inside her, the air still buzzed with unspoken panic. She opened the HR portal twice, hovered over the resignation form, then closed it. Leaving wasn't the answer, but neither was pretending nothing had happened. Maybe I'll just apologize, she thought. A simple, direct apology. Clarify it was a mistake. She typed a draft, Mr. Whitmore. I realized I sent you a personal image by accident this morning. I'm terribly sorry for the error. She read it 3 times, deleted it, rewrote it shorter, then erased it again. Every version sounded worse, too stiff, too defensive, too human. At 12:45, her phone buzzed. From Ethan Whitmore. Subject meeting agenda, afternoon review. Her pulse jumped. She opened it. Please prepare the Morrison summary and the revised client list for the 2 o'clock session. Thank you. Nothing more. Business as usual, professional, controlled. A wall of formality she suddenly didn't know whether to be relieved by or hurt by. She exhaled slowly. Good. It's fine. He's pretending it never happened. She wished she could do the same. When the afternoon light slanted through the office glass, turning everything the color of amber, she walked toward the conference room carrying folders. Ethan stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and measured. He ended the call, turned, and their eyes met for the first real moment since the mistake. The world seemed to narrow around that gaze. There was no accusation, no cold disapproval. Instead, something flickered recognition, perhaps even warmth before he masked it again with quiet professionalism. Thank you, Claire, he said, taking the folder. Their fingers brushed an ordinary motion charged with something unspoken. You're welcome, sir, she murmured and stepped back. He hesitated, almost as if to say more, then simply nodded. Good work. For the rest of the meeting, he was the same Ethan everyone knew, precise, commanding, impossible to read. Yet every time she glanced up, she caught that brief softness in his expression, like a crack in the cold wall. When the session ended, Claire gathered the papers, heart still drumming. She couldn't name what had changed, only that something had. The wall was still there, but somewhere deep within, warmth had begun to seep through. Outside, the sun dipped behind the skyline, washing Boston in pale gold. Inside the tower, 2 people sat behind their separate panes of glass, one wondering how to breathe again, the other realizing he just had. Autumn deepened in Boston. Leaves along Beacon Hill turned copper and gold, drifting across the sidewalks like pages torn from forgotten books. From inside the Whitmore and Lane Tower, the season felt distant, muted behind layers of glass and professionalism. But sometimes, when the wind pressed against the windows, Claire could almost hear it calling her back to real life. She told herself the incident was over. Mr. Whitmore had never mentioned the photo again. Everything between them had returned to the careful rhythm of work. Yet small things began to shift, almost imperceptibly, like the first cracks in winter ice. Each morning, when Claire arrived at her desk, a fresh cup of black coffee already waited near her monitor. She hadn't ordered it, and no one ever admitted leaving it there. The first time, she thought it must have been the intern. The second time, she suspected otherwise. Ethan Whitmore was a man of exact habits. He noticed details, remembered schedules, but rarely crossed invisible lines. Still, the coffee kept appearing, perfectly the way she liked it. 1 sugar, no cream. She pretended not to notice, and yet her hand trembled slightly every time she lifted the cup. Their conversations remained efficient, measured. Meeting at 9. File this under client review. Good work on that report. But between the words, something else existed. Tiny pauses, glances that lingered a second too long. The faint softening of his tone when he spoke her name. One afternoon, while preparing notes for a labor rights case, Claire found herself staring out the window. The skyline shimmered, and in that reflection she saw the version of herself she used to be: young, idealistic, still believing the law could heal the world. She remembered her first day in law school, standing outside the courthouse watching a public defender argue for a homeless veteran. She had whispered then, "I want to do that. I want to stand beside people no one listens to. Life, of course, had taken other turns: the divorce, the bills, the need for stability. Whitmore and Lane paid well and respected her precision. But lately the cases felt mechanical corporate contracts, mergers, numbers without faces. The only time she felt human again was when she worked on the firm's few pro bono files. Sometimes Ethan assigned them to her, quietly, without explanation. She had assumed it was coincidence. Now she wasn't so sure. As she reviewed testimony transcripts, Ethan's voice came through the intercom. "Claire, could you step in for a moment?" She gathered her notes and walked to his office. The air smelled faintly of cedar and the dark roast coffee he favored. Sunlight poured through the window, catching the edge of his glasses as he looked up from a stack of depositions. "I need you to review the Cooper case summary," he said. "The opposing counsel is twisting the employee safety clause. I'd like your opinion." "My opinion?" she repeated, surprised. Assistants weren't usually asked for opinions. He nodded once. "You see what others miss?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course. I'll handle it." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her again, softer this time. "Claire?" She glanced back. "Thank you for the coffee order this morning," he said evenly. "You remembered I switched brands." Her brows knit in confusion. I thought you—" He smiled faintly. The first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Then maybe we've both been thinking of each other's caffeine intake." For a beat, silence hung between them, gentle, amused, fragile. Then he cleared his throat. "Professional again. That will be all." Claire walked back to her desk, pulse fluttering. She wasn't sure if they had just shared a joke or a confession. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the office changed in ways only she seemed to notice. Ethan lingered a little longer at the communal printer where she worked. When she frowned at her screen, he would appear beside her, asking quietly, problem as if attuned to every sigh she tried to hide. And sometimes, during late evening hours when the others had gone, she caught him standing near the window, gazing out at the city, his reflection soft and unguarded. One evening, she found herself alone in the break room, sorting through case notes. The sound of the elevator doors startled her. Footsteps approached. "Still here?" Ethan asked. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The sight felt oddly intimate. "I wanted to finish the Cooper review," she said. He poured himself water, nodded. "You remind me of my father. He used to say a day's work isn't done until the conscience is quiet." "Was he a lawyer too, Judge?" Ethan replied. "A man who believed fairness could fix anything." He paused. He was wrong about some things, but not about the worth of trying. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like shared air. Claire smiled faintly. "Maybe fairness can't fix everything, but it's a start." Their eyes met. The fluorescent light above flickered once, a soft buzz filling the room. She saw something human in him, then tiredness, maybe grief, but also warmth struggling to surface. He looked away first. "Go home." "Claire," he said gently, "you've done enough for today." When she gathered her papers, he added, almost an afterthought, "You did good work." She carried that sentence with her all the way to the parking lot, repeating it in her mind as though it were proof that the cold CEO might, after all, have a heartbeat. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, city lights stretching beneath him like constellations. He thought about the photo again, not the image itself, but the honesty of it. Claire's openness had unsettled him, yet it had also awakened something he had buried long ago, the memory of feeling alive. He opened a blank email, began to type, "Thank you for your insight today," then stopped, deleting the line. Too personal. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The firm demanded structure, and so did he. But structure, he was starting to realize, had become his prison. When had silence become easier than truth? He rose, looked across the hall at the faint light still glowing under Claire's office door. She must have left her lamp on again. Without thinking, he walked over, switched it off, and stood for a moment in the doorway. Her desk was neat. A small frame photo of her mother beside a stack of color-coded folders. A simple life, yet full of heart. He whispered quietly to the empty room. "Thank you, Claire," then turned back toward his own office. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the glass panes, carrying with it the scent of rain and turning leaves. Inside, two souls. One afraid of feeling, one afraid of falling, continued their silent dance across parallel lines, drawing closer with every unspoken glance. Somewhere between lines and looks, warmth had begun to melt the cold. The conference room on the 39th floor felt like a courtroom, that morning-polished oak table, cold fluorescent light, and the heavy scent of tension. A storm had gathered outside Boston's skyline, rain streaking against the wide windows. Inside, voices clashed with quiet hostility. Ethan Whitmore sat at the head of the table, every line of his body still and precise. Beside him, Claire Bennett arranged her notes, her calm fingers betraying none of the unease twisting in her stomach. Across from them, a man in an expensive navy suit leaned back, exuding the arrogance of unchecked wealth. Thomas Halden, a major client head of a pharmaceutical corporation, was known for expecting the law to bend around him. He jabbed a finger toward the document Claire had prepared. "This clause is absurd. It implies fault on our part. You're protecting the claimants more than my company." Claire spoke carefully, keeping her tone steady. "The clause is standard liability language, Mr. Halden. It ensures transparency and spare me the lecture. Miss Bennett," his voice cut through her explanation like a blade, "you're a secretary, not counsel. Maybe leave the legal talk to the professionals." The words struck harder than she expected. She wasn't new to condescension, but hearing it in front of half the boardroom made something twist inside her chest. Still, she managed a polite nod. "Of course." Before she could continue gathering her papers, Ethan's voice sliced through the silence, calm, firm, unmistakable. "Mr. Halden," he said, his tone lower than usual, steady as thunder. "Miss Bennett is here because I value her legal insight. If you have an issue with the document, address it to me." The room went still. Even the sound of the rain seemed to pause. Halden blinked, surprised. "I didn't mean." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You did, but let's not mistake respect for weakness. She drafted that clause under my directive. If you find it absurd, then you find my judgment absurd. Is that what you're saying?" Color rose to Halden's face. "Of course not." "Ethan, then perhaps we can proceed," Ethan said smoothly, but the edge in his voice carried unmistakable authority. Around the table, junior partners glanced at one another, whispering behind legal pads. No one had ever heard him defend anyone like that, not publicly, not emotionally. Claire kept her gaze on the paper in front of her, but her pulse raced. It wasn't embarrassment now. It was something hotter, sharper, gratitude mixed with confusion. She could feel his presence beside her, solid and unyielding, like a wall built not to keep her out, but to keep the storm away. The meeting continued. Contracts, clauses, signatures. Claire spoke only when needed, but every time her voice wavered, Ethan's followed calm, supportive, grounding her. When it ended, Halden left with forced politeness, his handshake quick and shallow. As the door closed, Claire finally allowed herself to exhale. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, gathering the scattered papers. Ethan stood beside her, straightening his cuffs. "Yes, I did." She looked up. "It might make things complicated. Clients don't like to be corrected. Clients like results," he replied. His eyes met hers steady, unreadable but not cold. "And they'll get them because of you." Something in her chest ached. For 3 years, she had built walls around herself, calling them professionalism. Now, one look from him felt like sunlight cracking through the gaps. That evening, the rain deepened. By the time the office emptied, thunder rolled over the harbor, and the streets shimmered with reflections of red taillights and silver puddles. Claire stayed late, revising the Halden report. She preferred the quiet after hours, the hum of the city below, the rhythmic tap of rain against glass. It was the kind of stillness where thoughts had room to breathe. She rubbed her temples. Why did his words matter so much, she wondered? Why did the simple act of defending me feel like something more than professional courtesy? When she finally shut down her computer, the clock read 9:37 p.m. She sighed, slipped on her coat, and reached for her umbrella, only to realize she'd left it at home. Outside the corridor, lights had dimmed to half power. The glass walls reflected her faint silhouette, tired but calm. She pressed the elevator button and waited, listening to the faint rain tapping against the windows like an impatient knock. A voice behind her broke the silence. "Still here?" She turned. Ethan stood near his office doorway, jacket off, tie loosened, the faintest trace of fatigue in his eyes. "I was just finishing up," she said. "You too?" He nodded. "Halden called twice more tonight. I think he'll sign by morning. That's good news? For the firm?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "For humanity. I'm not so sure." She tilted her head. Surprised. He offered a wry smile. "Some people measure success in numbers. I envy those who don't." There it was again, the glimpse behind the armor. The man who read between lines instead of merely writing them. She smiled gently. "Maybe that's why you hired me. I still believe people can change." His gaze held hers, something like warmth flickering through. "Maybe you're right." The elevator chimed open. She stepped inside, then paused. "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." "Good night, Claire." He hesitated, then added softly, "And thank you for holding your ground today." Before she could answer, the doors slid shut. When she reached the lobby, the rain was falling harder, drumming against the glass. She stood by the revolving doors, debating whether to run for a cab or wait it out. Lightning flashed across the Charles, illuminating the soaked street. A voice called behind her. "Claire." She turned. Ethan stood there, holding an umbrella, black, wide, simple. Without a word, he extended it toward her. "You'll need this more than I do." She blinked, caught between surprise and something deeper. "You'll get drenched. I'll survive," he said. "Besides, the driver's pulling up under the awning. I'll be fine." She accepted it slowly, fingers brushing his as she took the handle. The touch was fleeting, but sent a quiet current through her. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a small nod, eyes soft under the fluorescent light. "Get home safe, Claire." She stepped outside, the umbrella opening with a soft snap. Rain pattered above her, shielding her from the storm. For a moment, she glanced back through the glass doors. Ethan still stood there, watching as she disappeared into the silver curtain of rain. In another life, it might have been nothing more than courtesy. But in this one, it was the beginning of something neither dared to name. The next few weeks passed in a blur of deadlines, hearings, and paperwork thick enough to hide behind. But one project stood out: the East Line Workers Union appeal, a pro bono case defending factory employees who had lost their health benefits after a corporate merger. Most partners avoided it. There was no profit, no publicity, only hours of unpaid labor and sleepless nights. Ethan Whitmore took it himself. And, naturally, he asked Claire Bennett to assist. On a Tuesday evening, the firm's 42nd floor was nearly empty. The city below glowed like a sea of lanterns. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a more patient echo of the storm that had changed everything weeks before. Stacks of reports spread across the long table in the conference room. Claire's notes were color-coded, margins filled with neat handwriting. Ethan's papers, by contrast, were orderly but worn at the edges, like they'd been read too many times. He sat at the far end, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, studying a labor statute from 1974. Claire watched him for a brief moment before looking away. There was something quietly magnetic about his focus, how still he became when immersed in words. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I can't remember the last time a CEO spent 3 hours reading labor law." He glanced up, one brow lifting slightly. That's because most CEOs don't like reading about fairness when it costs them profit. She smiled faintly. And you're different, I try to be, he said, setting down the file. But trying doesn't always mean succeeding. His voice carried that low timbre that always made the room feel smaller. Claire rested her chin on her hand. You believe in fairness, though? I've seen it. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I believe in order. Fairness is more elusive. For every worker protected, another goes unnoticed. For every victory, there's a compromise. That's a very lawyer way to look at life, she said gently. He chuckled, the sound rare but genuine. And how do you see it? Claire hesitated. Fairness isn't balance sheets and clauses. It's being seen. It's when someone says, you matter, even if you're small. That's what drew me to law in the first place. Ethan studied her face, earnest, tired, lit softly by the desk lamp. What made you lose that belief? Her eyes flickered down. Maybe I didn't lose it. Maybe I just stopped expecting it from people, from institutions, from myself. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence like a slow heartbeat. Then Ethan said quietly, I know what it's like to lose faith in people. She looked up, surprised by the hint of rawness in his tone. He continued, voice lower, almost reluctant. After my wife passed, I told myself work would be simpler. Law is predictable, grief isn't. It was easier to manage contracts than emotions. Claire's throat tightened. She had known he was widowed, but he never spoke of it. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave a small, almost weary smile. Don't be. Everyone told me time would heal. They just forgot to mention it, leave scars that never fade. She nodded slowly. I think loneliness is the only wound that keeps reopening, even when you think it's closed. He looked at her, then really looked like someone who had just found a reflection in a place he didn't expect. Hours slipped by, unnoticed. Outside, the lights of Boston flickered under drizzle. Inside, two people sat surrounded by paper and unspoken things. At one point, Claire reached across to hand him a document. Their fingers brushed briefly, accidentally, but neither pulled away immediately. Her pulse stumbled. His eyes met hers, steady yet uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step closer or turn away. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Then Ethan cleared his throat, gently reclaiming the page. Thank you. She murmured, of course, pretending to focus on the spreadsheet, though her mind had gone blank. For the next few minutes, the silence was no longer comfortable. It shimmered with an energy neither wanted to name. Every rustle of paper, every shared glance felt amplified. Finally, Ethan rose to pour more coffee. You should call it a night, he said, without looking at her. It's past 11. Claire smiled faintly. You first. He turned, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. You're as stubborn as you are precise. Comes with the job. When he handed her a mug, their hands almost touched again. This time, she withdrew quickly, her cheeks warm. He noticed but said nothing. Later, as the printer hummed and the last pages slid into the tray, Claire leaned back, stretching her sore shoulders. You ever wonder, she asked softly, if we spend so much time fighting for justice that we forget how to live it? Ethan tilted his head. What do you mean, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the skyline. We fight for people we'll never meet. But when it comes to ourselves, our own happiness, we become bystanders. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe we're afraid that happiness makes us weaker, that it distracts us from the fight. Do you believe that he shook his head? No, but I used to. Their eyes met again. There was no smile this time, only recognition, two people realizing they were no longer standing on opposite sides of the same glass wall. The clock ticked past midnight. Claire gathered her papers, carefully aligning the edges to keep her hands from trembling. I should go, she said quietly. We both should. Ethan nodded, though something in his expression hesitated, as if part of him wanted to ask her to stay a few minutes longer, not to work, but to just exist beside him. At the door, she turned back. "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." He looked up from his notes, eyes tired but soft. "Good night, Claire, and thank you for reminding me what fairness feels like." She smiled faintly. "You didn't forget. You just needed someone to remind you." Their gazes lingered once more, long enough for the world outside to fade, for the hum of the city to disappear. Then Claire stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her. That night, lying in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the brush of his hand, the tone in his voice, the warmth she'd seen behind his careful eyes. She pressed a pillow against her chest, whispering to the dark, "What are you doing? Claire Bennett. He's your boss. Your world depends on discipline, on distance." But the heart, as she was learning, had its own sense of direction, and sometimes it led straight into trouble. She turned off the lamp, the city lights spilling across her ceiling like restless thoughts. Outside, the rain continued, steady and endless. Inside, a quiet truth took root. She was no longer sure whether she was finding her way or losing it. The first whisper came quietly, like a draft slipping through a closed window. By Friday morning, it had turned into a current strong enough to rattle the glass walls of Whitmore and Lane LLP. "Did you hear someone murmured near the copier? Whitmore's assistant, Claire Bennett. She's been spending a lot of late nights with him." "I saw them leaving together after 11, another voice added. "Maybe it's just work." But then again, by noon, the story had spread through every corridor, slipping between emails, whispered over coffee cups, embedded in knowing glances, the cold CEO and his beautiful assistant, a cliché too tempting for office gossip to resist. Up on the 42nd floor, Ethan Whitmore continued his day as if unaware. His face remained calm, his commands precise. But under the surface, the air around him had changed. Conversations paused when he entered a room. Smiles turned into forced nods. Even the rhythm of footsteps outside his office seemed different, hesitant, uncertain. And from his corner desk, Adam Pierce watched everything unfold with quiet satisfaction. Adam had always prided himself on reading power the way others read books. He saw the firm as a chessboard, and every rumor, every whispered word was a piece to be moved. He'd noticed the subtle warmth between Claire and the CEO weeks ago, the coffee left on her desk. The way Whitmore's gaze softened when she spoke, it had irritated him more than he expected. Not just jealousy, but calculation. Claire's growing influence threatened his own ambitions. So he did what ambitious men often do when truth stood in their way. He twisted perception. It had taken only one offhand comment to a partner at lunch strange. "Isn't it? Whitmore's spending a lot of time with Bennett lately. After hours, behind closed doors. Maybe he's finally human." He hadn't needed to say more. The story built itself. By late afternoon, Claire began to sense it. At first, it was the sidelong glances, then the sudden hush whenever she entered a room. Her inbox filled with polite but distant messages. Even the receptionist, who always greeted her warmly, now smiled with uneasy restraint. During a break, she overheard two junior associates whispering near the elevator. "You think it's true, who knows? But people say he defended her in front of Halden. That's not nothing. Still, a woman like her. Maybe she knows what she's doing." Claire froze, her heart plummeting. For a moment, she wanted to step out and correct them, to say, "You're wrong, it's not like that." But her voice caught in her throat. Words felt powerless against something so poisonous, so invisible. She turned away, walking quickly down the hall, her heels clicking against the marble like nervous punctuation marks. Back in her office, she shut the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. She sat at her desk, staring at the city skyline, and whispered to herself, how did this happen? It wasn't the gossip that hurt. It was what it threatened. Ethan's reputation was immaculate. The press had called him the ice wall of Boston, incorruptible, disciplined, the man who never mixed sentiment with business. If these rumors grew, they could destroy years of that hard-won respect, and it would all lead back to her. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then put it down again. What could she even say? I'm sorry people are cruel. I'm sorry I exist that evening, when most of the staff had left. Ethan appeared at her door. Claire. His tone was as calm as always, but she heard something different. Weariness, maybe concern. She looked up quickly, trying to compose herself. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. He stepped inside. You've heard it, haven't you? She hesitated. Some of it. He nodded once. Ignore it. It will fade. But it won't, she said quietly. Not in this place. People remember rumors longer than facts. He studied her, hands in his pockets, eyes searching hers. You've done nothing wrong. You've worked harder than anyone here. You've earned your place. That doesn't matter, she whispered. Perception matters more than truth. Something flickered across his expression. Anger, guilt, something she couldn't name. I'll handle it. How she asked, her voice trembling. By denying it, that'll only make it sound true. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with an expression that nearly undid her gentle, protective, and unbearably sad. Then let them talk, he said finally. Let them choke on their own assumptions. She stared at him. You shouldn't have to defend me again. It'll only make things worse. Maybe, he admitted softly, but I'd rather face their judgment than watch you doubt yourself. Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but the words refused to form. He turned toward the window, his reflection merging with the rain outside. Try not to carry it, he said after a long pause. People who build shadows out of light are only afraid of seeing themselves. When he left, the office felt hollow. Claire sank into her chair, his words echoing in her chest like distant thunder. That night, she couldn't escape the noise in her mind. At home, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the fluorescent light harsh against her tired face. Her reflection looked both familiar and foreign, still her, but not the woman she thought she was. What have I done? She touched the cool glass, eyes glistening. Am I destroying the very thing I respect most? She whispered. She had come to Whitmore and Lane believing in purpose, in structure, in the dignity of professionalism. Now she felt like an intruder in her own convictions. Every rumor, every sideways glance chipped away at the confidence she'd worked so hard to rebuild after her divorce. For the first time, she wondered if she should walk away, not because she was guilty, but because she couldn't bear to see Ethan's name dragged down with hers. Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away impatiently, angry at her own weakness. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent. In some apartment across the street, someone laughed. Life went on, untouched by her small storm. She turned off the light, letting darkness soften the edges of her reflection. Maybe tomorrow she would find a way to fix things. Or maybe she'd have to let them burn. Either way, the world would keep whispering. And she would have to decide what she believed more, the noise outside or the quiet truth in her own heart. Monday arrived gray and heavy, the kind of morning when the clouds hung low enough to press against the tops of buildings. Inside, Whitmore and Lane, LLP, the air felt colder than usual, quieter, too. Whispers still floated through corridors, softer now, but sharper, like fine dust that never settled. Claire Bennett sat at her desk, long before anyone else arrived. The city was barely awake outside the windows. In front of her lay a single sheet of paper, the kind that carried more weight than its thinness suggested. Her resignation letter. She had rewritten it 4 times since the weekend. Each version sounded both too formal and too emotional. In the end, she chose simplicity. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I request a temporary leave of absence to allow current circumstances to calm. I remain grateful for all opportunities given under your leadership. Her hand hovered over the signature line. The pen trembled slightly. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because she couldn't bear the idea that his name, Ethan Whitmore, the man who had fought for her dignity, the man who had unknowingly made her believe in warmth again, might be dragged through more mud because of her presence. When she finally placed the folded letter into an envelope, her breath came out shaky but resolved. At 8:30 sharp, she walked down the hall toward his office. Ethan stood by the window when she entered, the skyline behind him silver with mist. He didn't turn right away. He didn't have to. He seemed to feel her presence before he saw her. "Good morning," he said, voice calm, measured. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Her tone was steady, though her palms were damp. He turned then, eyes cool but tired. "You're early. I wanted to speak with you privately." She held out the envelope. "It's about my position." He didn't move. "What about it?" She placed it on the edge of his desk. "I'd like to request a leave of absence. Unpaid." A faint pause. Then, softly, "A leave?" "Yes," she said, forcing the words out evenly. "Just until things settle. I don't want the firm or you to suffer any more unnecessary attention." Ethan's expression didn't change, but the air between them seemed to tighten. "So, that's your solution," he said quietly. "To run?" "This isn't running," she replied. "It's responsibility." He stepped closer, his voice still low but sharper now. Responsibility would be standing your ground, not disappearing when things get uncomfortable. Her heart pounded. "It's not about comfort, Ethan. It's about protecting what matters. Your reputation matters. The firm matters." His gaze locked onto hers. "And what about you, Claire? Don't you matter in this equation?" Her breath hitched. "I'm the problem in this equation." "No," he said firmly, almost too quickly. "You're the only part of it that's ever made sense." The words hung in the air, raw, unscripted. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then he exhaled, running a hand through his hair as though angry at himself for saying too much. "You think leaving will silence them? It won't. It'll only confirm what they already believe." "Maybe," she said quietly. "But at least it'll stop the damage." Ethan's voice dropped lower, rougher. "Why protect me by disappearing? Claire." The question hit her like a blow. Her throat tightened, but she met his eyes. "Because you deserve peace. Because people will forgive a rumor faster than they'll forgive a truth that looks like affection." He flinched slightly at the word affection, as though it revealed something neither of them had dared to name. "You don't get to make that decision for me," he said after a moment. "You don't get to erase yourself from this office like you were a mistake." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not erasing myself. I'm choosing distance before the world chooses it for us." He stared at her so long, so intently, that she almost looked away. "I never asked you to protect me," he said finally. "No," she whispered, "but you've done it for me. And now it's my turn." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, anger, helplessness, all tangled together. He turned away, walking to the window, one hand braced against the frame. For a long time, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was quieter, almost breaking. "You think I care about gossip? I've faced judges, boards, auditors. But watching you walk out of this office because of a rumor." He stopped, the words catching. "That's the first battle I know I'll lose." Her eyes burned. "Ethan!" He turned sharply, his composure restored but brittle. "If you need time, take it. I won't stop you." His tone was back to the professional calm that made him unshakable in every courtroom, but she could see the strain in his jaw, the stillness of someone trying not to feel. She nodded slowly. "Thank you. I'll make sure everything is organized before I go." He didn't reply. When she reached the doorway, she hesitated. She wanted to say something, anything to ease the silence. But words felt useless against the weight of what lingered between them. She turned the handle. Ethan's voice came from behind her, soft, almost unrecognizable. "Claire." She froze. "If I'd ever believed in coincidence," he said quietly, "I'd call that message the one you sent by mistake, the most meaningful accident of my life. Her chest tightened painfully. She wanted to turn back, to look at him, to tell him that same message had changed her life too. But she didn't trust herself to speak. Instead, she whispered, "Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore," and stepped out. The door clicked shut, sealing the distance. Inside, Ethan stood motionless. The letter sat unopened on his desk. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window, a man who'd spent years mastering control, now watching it crumble piece by piece. He reached for the envelope, then stopped, fingers trembling. For the first time in years, he felt something close to despair, a hollow ache where discipline used to be. Outside, Claire walked down the corridor, the echo of her heels fading like a heartbeat slowing down. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen him standing there, eyes following her with an expression that said everything his voice never could lose: longing, and a question he'd never get to ask. Rain swept across Boston like a gray curtain that morning, streaking the windows of Whitmore and Lane LLP with restless lines. Inside the boardroom, the air felt heavier than the storm outside, thick with tension, unease, and unspoken judgment. The senior partners sat around the long mahogany table, papers neatly stacked, but attention fixed elsewhere. At the head of the table sat Ethan Whitmore, immaculate as ever, charcoal suit, calm posture, eyes unreadable. Yet beneath that stillness was something taut, like a string pulled too tight. On the far side of the room, Adam Pierce leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. His voice carried a false smoothness that didn't match the sharpness of his words. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, "I believe it's time we address the situation that's been circulating through the firm." A murmur rippled through the room. Several partners exchanged glances. Others shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's gaze lifted slowly. "Be clear, Adam." "What situation?" Adam gave a practiced sigh. "The one involving your assistant, Miss Bennett. The rumors, the late nights, the perception of impropriety. It's starting to affect client confidence. The board deserves assurance that no boundary has been crossed." The words landed like stones. The silence that followed was suffocating. At the far corner of the table, Claire Bennett sat motionless, her resignation letter unsigned and folded in her lap. She had been asked to attend for transparency. Her chest rose and fell quietly, each breath a battle to stay calm. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the agenda sheet before him, as though studying it, buying seconds to keep fury from breaking his composure. Finally, his voice came low, controlled, but edged with steel. "You're suggesting misconduct. I'm suggesting perception," Adam replied. "And perception, as we all know, shapes reputation. The firm's name depends on your integrity and hers." The phrase "in hers" was deliberate, poisonous. Claire felt the sting of it. She kept her eyes fixed on the grain of the table, afraid her face might betray her. Ethan's pen tapped once against the page, a soft, rhythmic sound. Then it stopped. He looked up, his gaze cutting straight through the room. "I've heard enough." Adam blinked. "Excuse me." Ethan rose to his feet. The motion was calm, but it shifted the energy of the entire room. Every whisper died instantly. "You want assurance," Ethan said. "Then you'll have it. Miss Bennett has conducted herself with the highest level of professionalism since the day she joined this firm. She has managed crises that would have sunk us. She's anticipated solutions before our partners even saw the problems. And she has worked harder, longer, and with more integrity than most people in this room." The words struck like thunder, measured, but impossible to ignore. No one moved. Even Adam's practiced smirk faltered. Ethan continued, voice steady but deepening with emotion. "Let me remind everyone here what fairness means. It means we don't punish someone because gossip finds them convenient. It means we don't tear down a woman's reputation because we mistake her competence for closeness." He paused, scanning the room. You call it perception. I call it cowardice. A sharp silence followed. The partners shifted uneasily in their seats. Adam tried to recover. Ethan, I understand your loyalty, but surely you can see how Ethan's voice cut through him. No, what I see is how quickly we turn on our own when it's easier than seeking the truth. He turned slightly, his eyes softening for the first time as they met Claire's. Miss Bennett's worth is not measured by whispers. It's measured by results, by integrity, and by courage. Qualities that, frankly, this firm could use more of. The tension in the room changed, not gone, but altered, like air after lightning. Several senior partners avoided his eyes, ashamed. Others nodded subtly, moved but silent. Claire's throat burned. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of them. But as his words echoed courage, integrity, worth the tears came quietly anyway, slipping down her cheeks before she could stop them. Ethan saw, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned back to the room. If anyone here still questions my leadership, I invite you to look at the record. This firm's growth over the last 5 years wasn't built on gossip. It was built on work on people like her. The final word landed like a verdict. No one spoke. Adam swallowed hard, his earlier confidence draining. Well, he said after a long pause, I only raised it because client's Ethan's stare stopped him cold. You raised it because it served you. The younger man looked away. For several seconds, the only sound was the rain drumming faintly against the windows. Finally, Ethan sat down again, the movement deliberate, signaling the meeting was over. This discussion is finished, he said simply. We move forward. He turned to Claire. Miss Bennett, would you please circulate the revised minutes once you're ready? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. The partners left one by one, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Adam was last to leave, his jaw tight, anger flickering behind his eyes. Ethan didn't look at him. When the door finally closed, only Ethan and Claire remained. The room felt hollow, like the echo of something that had broken. She stood slowly, gathering her papers, her vision still blurred from tears. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. You've already done enough for me. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion visible now that the performance was over. I wasn't defending you, Claire. I was defending the truth. Her lips trembled into a faint smile. The truth doesn't usually make people cry. He exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. Then maybe we've all forgotten what it sounds like. They stood there, the storm outside fading into a light drizzle. For the first time, the glass between them felt thinner, not gone, but fragile. Thank you, she said at last, voice trembling, for standing up when it mattered. He looked up at her, and in his eyes usually so distant, so composed, there was something unmistakably human, pain, relief, something dangerously close to affection. As she turned to leave, their eyes met one last time, his gaze holding hers as if to say all the things his voice couldn't. And in that silent exchange, the cold veneer around him finally cracked. The man who had built a life on restraint had just broken his own rule for her. The storm that morning wasn't just outside, it was everywhere. The news broke before sunrise. A grainy photo, taken through rain-streaked glass, had been posted online. Ethan Whitmore standing beside Claire Bennett in the lobby after the board meeting, his hand lightly touching her arm. The headline burned across every legal blog and gossip site. By noon, cold CEO melts for his assistant, the woman behind Whitmore's wall. By midday, television crews had gathered across the street from the firm. Cameras waited like vultures, their lenses glinting whenever someone in a suit walked through the front doors. Inside, phones rang endlessly. Emails flooded in some supportive, most cruel. And through it all, Claire sat in her office, motionless, her reflection trembling in the glass as flashbulbs popped below. Her inbox pinged again. A subject line, statement request, Boston Daily Chronicle. She didn't open it. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Her heart thudded against her ribs, every beat echoing a question she didn't know how to answer. How had things spun so far out of control? It wasn't the photograph itself. It was harmless, even professional. But the story written around it turned her into something she wasn't. The ambitious woman who seduced her boss. The reason the firm's reputation was at risk. Words could twist faster than truth could catch up. By afternoon, the PR department had set up crisis calls. Ethan handled the media with his usual composure statements about transparency, internal integrity, and professional standards. But no matter how calm he sounded, his eyes gave him away. When he entered Claire's office that evening, the city was gray with twilight. He didn't knock. He simply stood in the doorway, watching her stare at the blank computer screen. "Claire," he said quietly. She turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've been busy. Damage control," he said. "Apparently, the truth needs a full-time defense attorney." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Seems we both do." He stepped closer, hesitated. "You don't deserve this." "Neither do you," she replied. "But it's happening anyway." For a long moment, they said nothing. The office hummed with the sound of distant traffic. Then she whispered, "Maybe I should go. Just for a while." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Go where New Hampshire," she said softly. "My mother's not been well. I can help her for a few weeks. It'll give the press something else to talk about." He shook his head slightly. "Running won't change the truth." "No," she said, "but it might give us room to breathe." Something in her tone, gentle, resolute, made his chest tighten. "So, this is goodbye." "Not forever," she said. "Just until the noise fades." Ethan's jaw clenched. He turned away, staring out at the skyline. "Have I destroyed your peace?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a second, she saw not the CEO, the unshakable man behind the glass, but someone else entirely, someone tired, someone who carried guilt like armor. "You didn't destroy anything," she said softly. "You just stood too close when the world decided to strike." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Proximity guilt. That's new even for me." Claire took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, I need to protect what little of myself still belongs to me. The headlines have taken enough." He nodded, eyes still on the window. "Then do what you need to do." She wanted him to stop her to say something reckless, something that would make her stay, but he didn't. And maybe that was why she admired him even more. "I'll send you updates about the Anderson case," she said, trying to sound practical. He turned finally, eyes dark with something unspoken. "Don't," she blinked. "Don't what?" "Don't make this sound like business." That night, after she left, the office felt wrong, too quiet, too wide. Ethan stood alone at his desk, long after the cleaning staff had gone. Outside, the rain returned, drumming against the windows, blurring the skyline into streaks of silver. He loosened his tie, sat down, and pulled a sheet of stationery toward him. His hand hesitated above the paper before the pen began to move. "Claire, you once told me that justice means protecting those who can't protect themselves. I never thought I'd be the one failing to protect you. You made me believe again in decency, in warmth, in what it means to look at another person and see light instead of leverage. If leaving gives you peace, I'll accept it. But if silence ever hurts more than the noise outside, know this. You were never the story they wrote about you. You were the reason I began to question the man I'd become." When he finished, he read it once, then folded the page carefully. He slid it into an envelope but didn't write her address. He placed it in the top drawer of his desk and closed it gently, as though afraid to wake something sleeping inside. In New Hampshire, 2 days later, Claire stood by her mother's porch, watching leaves scatter across the lake. The air smelled of pine and damp wood, so clean it almost stung. Her mother's voice drifted from inside Claire. "Dear, there's tea on the stove." "I'll be right in," she said. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring out at the calm water. There were no reporters here, no whispers, just the quiet pulse of the wind and the soft murmur of the trees. But peace, she realized, wasn't the same as stillness. Peace came from knowing where your heart was safe and hers. No matter the distance, still felt tethered to Boston. She closed her eyes, picturing him alone in that glass tower. Maybe he was reading through contracts, his face lit by the screen. Maybe he was thinking of her the same way she thought of him, with equal parts gratitude and ache. A single tear slipped down her cheek, quick and clean. She wiped it away and whispered into the cool air, "I'll come back when I'm ready." That night, Ethan sat in his darkened office, unable to sleep. He opened the drawer again, took out the letter, and traced her name with his thumb. He thought about mailing it. Then he thought about how easily words could wound when they arrived too soon. Instead, he placed it back inside and whispered to the empty room. "She made me believe again." Outside, lightning flickered over the Charles River, illuminating the city for a single, fleeting second, bright, fragile, and real. And in that moment, Ethan understood something painful and simple. You could protect someone by letting them go, but you couldn't stop the world from spinning without them. The night began in calm, the kind of quiet that felt almost too delicate to last. In New Hampshire, autumn had painted the woods in gold and rust. Claire's mother had gone to bed early, and the small house by the lake was wrapped in stillness, just the wind brushing through the trees and the rhythmic creak of the porch swing outside. Claire stood by the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She was reviewing old case notes from her laptop, the Harrison Appeal, one of her last assignments in Boston. It had been a case about workplace harassment and a fired employee turned volatile. She had fought hard for justice back then, but some cases, she'd learned, didn't stay in the courtroom. A noise broke through the night, a crunch of gravel, then another. She froze, her pulse quickening. The porch light flickered. At first, she thought it might be the wind or maybe an animal, but when she stepped closer to the window, she saw a shadow moving just beyond the driveway. Tall, slow, watching. Her throat tightened. "Mom," she called softly toward the hallway. No answer. Her mother's bedroom light was off. Then came a sound she knew too well, a car door creaking open, then slamming shut. Her laptop screen reflected her own wide eyes as the porch steps groaned under weight. Someone was there. Claire backed away, reaching for her phone, but her hands were shaking too hard to type. Before she could call 911, a loud bang rattled the front door. A man's voice, rough and slurred by alcohol. "You think you can ruin my life and hide here?" Her breath caught. Tom Harrison, the disgraced client from the case, the one she'd helped expose. He'd sworn revenge during the trial before security dragged him out. "Tom, don't do this," she shouted, her voice trembling. "You need to leave another crash." The wood splintered. Claire ran to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, but the signal was gone. Storm clouds had rolled in, cutting the line. Outside, thunder cracked like a whip. She could hear him now, his boots scraping against the floorboards of the porch. "Come out, lawyer girl. You think you're better than me? You ruined everything." She backed toward the back door, heart pounding in her ears. But before she reached it, the front door burst open. The world tilted into chaos. Wind, rain, and the shadow of a man filled the doorway. Claire swung the nearest thing a lamp. It shattered across his arm, glass scattering like tiny stars. He cursed, lunging forward, and she slipped, falling hard against the table edge. Pain shot up her shoulder, but she pushed herself back, scrambling toward the kitchen exit. Then headlights blinding and sudden sliced through the storm from the road. A car door slammed, footsteps pounding across gravel, and then another voice. "Get away from her, Ethan." His tone, sharp and raw, cut through the rain like thunder. Before Claire could process how he had found her, Ethan lunged through the doorway, tackling the intruder to the ground. They struggled, limbs thrashing against the slick wood. The man swung wildly, but Ethan caught his wrist and twisted it hard. A sickening crack. The attacker howled. Within seconds, Ethan had pinned him down, breathing hard, rain and sweat mixing on his face. "Stay down," he hissed, his voice shaking not from fear, but fury. Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors must have called the police. The man cursed again, trying to crawl away, but Ethan pressed him down until blue lights flashed across the house. When the officers arrived, they pulled Harrison to his feet and shoved him into the patrol car. Claire stood barefoot in the rain, soaked to the bone, clutching her bruised arm. Her lips trembled, her breath shallow. Ethan turned toward her then, his eyes wild with worry. "Claire, are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her voice cracked. Just my shoulder. How did you even know?" He stepped closer, his chest rising and falling fast. "Your neighbor called the firm. She said there was a man outside your house. I didn't think I just drove from Boston." He nodded, rain dripping from his hair. 3 hours, maybe less. I don't even remember the road. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, only the sound of rain hitting the ground, the distant murmur of police radios. Then Ethan's voice softened, almost breaking. "Claire, I was never afraid of losing the firm, only of losing you." She looked up at him, eyes wide. For once, the controlled man she'd always known was gone. In his place stood someone stripped bare, his composure shattered, his heart laid open under the storm. "Ethan," her voice trembled, "you shouldn't have risked that drive." "I'd risk worse," he said quietly. "Every mile. I thought, what if I'm too late? What if she's—" He stopped, unable to finish. She stepped closer, touching his sleeve with her good hand. His body was trembling not from cold, but from the adrenaline that hadn't yet faded. "I'm okay," she whispered. "You got here in time." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world shrank to the space between them, the faint smell of rain on his coat, the warmth of his breath against the cold air. "Let me take you inside," he murmured. They sat in his car while officers took statements outside. The windshield fogged faintly from their breath. Claire leaned back, exhausted, her head resting against the seat. Ethan's hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. He hadn't said another word since the confession, as if afraid speaking again might undo what had already escaped. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You could have been hurt." He gave a faint laugh, dry, breathless. "You think I was thinking about myself?" "You never do," she whispered. He turned, eyes glistening in the dim light. "I didn't come here as your boss. Claire, I came here because..." He stopped again, searching for words. "Because when I heard your name on the phone, I couldn't breathe." Her throat tightened. "You shouldn't have to carry that fear." He shook his head. "It's not fear anymore. It's something deeper. Something I've been too cowardly to name." She looked at him for a long time, and then quietly said, "You just did?" For the first time that night, he smiled small, tired, real. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, the storm dissolving into mist. But inside that car, another kind of storm had passed, a quieter one, born of years of restraint, finally breaking open. He reached over, taking her hand gently, as if confirming she was real. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. Morning came softly over Walden Lake, the kind of dawn that felt like an apology after too much darkness. The rain had stopped sometime before sunrise. Thin mist hovered over the water, and every leaf shimmered under drops of silver light. Inside the small cottage, Claire Bennett sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, one arm in a sling from the night before. Across from her, at the edge of an old wooden chair, Ethan Whitmore sat quietly, his elbows on his knees, still in the same shirt he'd worn when he burst through her door. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with everything that hadn't yet been said. Her mother was still asleep upstairs. The house smelled of coffee and cedar, of rain-soaked wood and survival. Claire broke the silence first. "You didn't have to stay," she said gently. Her voice was tired but calm. Ethan's eyes lifted, their green-gray depths softened by the pale light. "You think I could leave after last night?" He looked down at his hands. They were scraped from the fight, one knuckle still raw. I couldn't sleep if I didn't know you were safe. Claire studied him for a long moment. The proud, distant man she once feared disappointing was gone. In his place sat someone human, vulnerable, almost fragile. Ethan, she said softly, you look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders for years. He gave a quiet, rueful laugh. I suppose I have. A pause. Then, slowly. You deserve to know why. Claire leaned forward slightly. You don't have to. I do. His tone was low, steady. Because if I don't say it now, I'll keep hiding behind work and schedules and every excuse that's kept me half alive. He looked out the window for a moment, watching the sunlight shift across the lake. My wife, her name was Emily. He began. We met in law school. She was brighter than anyone I'd ever known. Quick to laugh, never afraid to challenge me. He smiled faintly, the kind that comes with both warmth and pain. We were married 7 years, and then, one morning, she didn't wake up. An aneurysm, no warning. Claire's chest tightened. Ethan, I'm so sorry. He nodded slowly. I remember standing in the hospital corridor, listening to the doctor talk, and thinking, that can't be real. People die after a long illness, not during breakfast. He swallowed hard. After that, I stopped letting people close. Grief felt like a virus. I thought if I stayed behind glass, I'd never get sick again. Claire's eyes shimmered. She could almost see him there, standing in that hallway. Cold light overhead. The world falling apart quietly. I built this firm to keep from thinking. He continued, case after case, hour after hour. Success became armor. But you, he hesitated, his voice roughening. You walked into my office with calm and kindness, and it terrified me. She smiled faintly. Terrified? Yes. He looked at her then, his gaze unwavering. Because you made me feel again. The words hung between them like the fragile break of dawn. Claire exhaled slowly. I know that kind of fear. He tilted his head. You do. She nodded, eyes distant. My marriage ended 3 years ago. It wasn't violent or cruel. It was just hollow. We stopped being kind before we even stopped being in love. She toyed with the edge of her blanket, voice quiet but certain. I spent years wondering what I did wrong. Then I realized it wasn't about fault. It was about two people too afraid to admit they were lonely. Ethan listened, every word settling deep inside him. After the divorce, she continued. I promised myself I'd never let bitterness harden me. I still believe in decency, in people, even when they disappoint you. She looked up and met his gaze. Even when you disappoint yourself. Something in him shifted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was an understanding, a bridge quietly forming between two lives shaped by loss and restraint. Ethan spoke first. I used to think perfection kept people safe, that if I stayed in control, no one could hurt me again. His voice trembled slightly. But last night, when I thought I'd lose you, I realized I don't need control. I just need truth. Claire's lips curved into the faintest trembling smile. Then we're saying the same thing. He frowned slightly. What do you mean I don't need perfection? Ethan, she whispered. Just truth. Her words landed softly, yet they carried the weight of everything they'd both been hiding. Ethan's breath caught. His eyes closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sound of her voice. Then he reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand. It was a simple gesture. No grand promises, no declarations, just warmth, connection, realness. Claire didn't pull away. Her fingers tightened around his. Truth, she said again, means we start from here. No pretending we're not afraid. No hiding behind titles or guilt. He nodded, his thumb brushing gently against her palm. Then, let's start here. Outside, the mist began to lift. The lake shimmered brighter, and a flock of geese cut across the sky. their wings glinting in the morning sun. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he'd almost forgotten, the quiet joy of simply being seen. They sat in silence for a while, hands still clasped, watching the light change. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice soft. "When I first sent that picture to you, I thought it was the worst mistake of my life." He smiled faintly. "It might have been the best one of mine." She laughed gently, the sound warm and unguarded. "Maybe mistakes are just the universe's way of forcing us to pay attention." He nodded, eyes never leaving hers. "Then, I'm finally paying attention." The clock ticked quietly. A beam of sunlight crossed the floor and touched their joined hands. For once, neither of them moved away. Boston in late winter looked different when you were coming home from peace instead of running from pain. The skyline shimmered beneath pale sunlight, and for the first time in months, Claire Bennett didn't feel her chest tighten at the sight of the tall glass tower on State Street. Instead, she smiled softly as the car passed it. She was back, not just to the city, but to herself. Ethan met her at the firm's entrance that morning. No press waited outside now. No whispering crowd, just the quiet hum of a building that finally seemed to breathe again. He stood near the elevator, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, the steam rising between them like a quiet truce. "Welcome home," he said. Claire took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "It feels different here." "It is," Ethan replied. "You left peace behind and brought it back with you." They both smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that felt earned. By spring, the headlines had faded, the rumors were gone, but something new had taken their place, the Whitmore Legal Aid Foundation. The idea had started during one of their late-night talks in New Hampshire, when the storm had finally calmed. Claire had said, "The law shouldn't belong only to those who can afford it," and Ethan, without hesitation, had replied, "Then let's change that." Now, 2 months later, the foundation was taking shape, an office tucked inside a renovated brick warehouse in South Boston, where sun spilled through tall windows onto open tables covered with case files, coffee mugs, and plans drawn in pencil and hope. Each evening, when most of the city was winding down, their lights stayed on. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, her hair pulled into a loose knot, reading client letters written on crumpled notebook pages. Ethan worked across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled high, his tie forgotten somewhere hours ago. He'd changed, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the small ways that matter most. He smiled more now, even laughed sometimes. He asked about people's families. He said thank you, without glancing at his watch. And when Claire spoke, he listened not as a CEO calculating risk, but as a man trying to understand. Sometimes, in the middle of work, she would glance up and catch him watching her, not with the guarded curiosity of the past, but with quiet admiration, like someone rediscovering color after years of grayscale. One night, near midnight, they sat in the glow of desk lamps reviewing applications for pro bono cases. Outside, snow drifted against the windows in soft spirals. Claire rubbed her temples and sighed. "Do you realize we've reviewed 72 cases this week?" Ethan chuckled. "Only 72, I must be losing my touch." She gave him a look that made him laugh again, a sound she hadn't heard enough of before. "Ethan Whitmore laughing," she teased. "The world may never recover." He leaned back, eyes bright. "You make it sound rare." "It used to be," she said, smiling. "But I like this version of you better." He looked at her for a moment, the warmth in his eyes deeper than words. "So do I." They returned to their work, but the air between them hummed softly with something unspoken. Weeks passed. The foundation grew, law students volunteered. Retired attorneys offered mentoring hours, and the first small victory came from a tenant rights case that saved a single mother's apartment. When the ruling arrived, Claire held the court document like a fragile trophy. Ethan stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. "You did it. You," she almost corrected, but stopped. "We did it," she said instead. He smiled again, slow, proud, no longer afraid to show emotion. Later that evening, as they packed up, Ethan lingered near the window. The city lights flickered in his eyes, and for the first time, his reflection didn't look lonely. "I used to think success meant never stopping," he said. "Now I realize it means knowing when to stand still." Claire leaned beside him, her shoulder brushing his. And when to listen, he turned to her, voice low. "You taught me that." She met his gaze, soft and steady. "You were ready to learn." The clock ticked quietly. The snow outside turned to rain. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into the hum of the city. "Do you ever think," she said after a while, "that maybe people don't heal alone? Maybe healing begins when two wounds find each other." Ethan looked at her, the words sinking deep. "Then we were meant to collide." Their eyes met no grand declaration, just the quiet certainty of two people who had survived themselves long enough to finally understand one another. He reached out, covering her hand where it rested on the windowsill. "We've built something good here," he said softly. "Not just the foundation, this us." Claire smiled, eyes glimmering in the city light. "Then, let's keep building." The next morning, the first clients arrived, an elderly veteran facing eviction, a young mother seeking child support, a man wrongfully dismissed from his job. The lobby buzzed with quiet hope, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of voices learning they had a place to be heard. Claire moved among them with calm confidence, offering forms, directions, and smiles that reached her eyes. Ethan watched from his office doorway for a moment before joining her, slipping a donation envelope into the contribution box anonymously. When she caught him doing it, she raised an eyebrow. Secret generosity. He shrugged. "Old habits die hard." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're getting soft, Whitmore." He smiled back. Maybe that's the point. That evening, when the last light flicked off and the office fell quiet, Claire paused by the door. The city glowed through the tall windows, Boston alive and moving, just as it always had been. But for the first time, she didn't feel small in it. She felt part of something that mattered. Behind her, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "You coming?" She turned, smiling softly, just taking a second to remember what this feels like. "And what's that hope?" she said simply. He nodded, holding the door open for her. Then, let's never lose it. The courthouse in downtown Boston had always felt cold to Claire Bennett, a place where justice was measured in facts and fees, not in heart. But that morning, as she walked up the granite steps beside Ethan Whitmore, the air felt different, brighter, purposeful. For weeks, their small foundation had been preparing for this case, a class action lawsuit on behalf of dozens of low-income tenants defrauded by a housing corporation. The company had promised affordable living, then doubled rents through hidden clauses. For many, it had meant eviction, homelessness, despair. This time, Ethan wasn't representing the corporation. He was standing beside those who'd been ignored, and Claire was the one leading the argument. The courtroom buzzed quietly as people filled the benches. Journalists, law students, everyday citizens drawn by curiosity, by rumor, or by hope that someone might finally challenge the system and win. Ethan leaned toward her before proceedings began. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried pride. "You're ready for this." She smiled faintly, though her palms were damp. "It's been a long time since I argued in court." He shook his head. "No, it's been a long time since the court heard someone who believes in what they're saying." Claire's throat tightened. "You trust me with this, with everything," he said simply. And then the judge entered, and all rose. Across the aisle, representing the corporation, sat Adam Pierce, once Ethan's colleague, now his rival. He looked sharp, confident, every word rehearsed. But there was a flicker of unease in his posture, the weight of having crossed too many lines for too long. When opening statements began, Adam went first. He painted the case as a misunderstanding of contractual nuance, his voice smooth, his smile colder than glass. Then it was Claire's turn. She rose slowly, approached the podium, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to still. "Your Honor," she began, "this case isn't about loopholes or technicalities. It's about dignity." Her voice was steady, rich with quiet conviction. These families signed leases believing they had found stability. Instead, they were tricked by words buried in fine print, written to confuse the very people least able to defend themselves. She paused, meeting the eyes of the judge, then the tenants seated behind her, faces weary but hopeful. "The law may be written in ink, but justice," she said softly, "is written in the lives it protects." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even Adam's pen froze mid-note. Ethan watched from the defense table, chest swelling with pride. He had argued hundreds of cases, outsmarted entire boards, but never not once had he spoken with that kind of truth. He realized then that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it spoke in the voice of a woman who'd learned to turn her scars into strength. Hours passed. The company's lawyers objected, stalled, tried to twist every clause into confusion, but Claire dismantled their arguments piece by piece, her logic precise, her empathy unshakable. When a witness broke down on the stand, recalling eviction in the middle of winter, she placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder before continuing her questioning. Ethan had given her the floor completely. He spoke only when necessary, brief, strategic, always backing her lead. It wasn't just trust, it was partnership. At one point, the judge leaned forward, expression thoughtful. "Ms. Bennett," he asked, "are you suggesting that this case is about moral intent rather than legal compliance?" Claire met his gaze evenly. "Your Honor, I'm suggesting the two should never be separate." Even the courtroom stenographer paused for a heartbeat before typing. By late afternoon, the rain began outside, soft, steady, as if the city itself was listening. Claire delivered her closing argument standing beside a stack of battered lease contracts, each marked with the initials of someone who had once believed the system would protect them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried weight because they were true. "Justice," she said, "isn't about who can afford the best lawyer. It's about who dares to stand up when silence becomes unbearable." When she finished, the courtroom fell into a silence so deep that even the storm outside seemed to pause. Then the judge nodded. "Court is adjourned until verdict." The decision came the next morning. The tenants won. The court ordered restitution, new oversight measures, and penalties against the corporation for deceptive practices. When the ruling was read aloud, the room erupted tears, applause, disbelief. Ethan turned toward Claire, his face breaking into a rare, unguarded smile. "You did it." She shook her head, tears already slipping down her cheeks. "We did." He reached out and took her hand right there at the defense table publicly, without hesitation. For once, he didn't care who saw. Around them, the tenants embraced one another, reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed. But for Ethan and Claire, the noise faded into something softer, a hum of joy, of justice, of 1,000 quiet victories merging into one. Adam sat frozen on the opposite bench, his jaw tight, the color drained from his face. He rose without a word, gathered his papers, and walked out shoulders stiff, pride cracking like old stone. No one stopped him. No one needed to. Some endings write themselves. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving puddles that mirrored the sky. Claire and Ethan stood at the top of the steps as sunlight broke through, scattering across the city. People were cheering around them, clients, volunteers, strangers. Someone handed Claire a bouquet of daisies. Another hugged Ethan, thanking him for standing on the right side of the fight. When the crowd began to thin, Ethan turned to her quietly. "You know," he said, "there was a time I thought power meant never letting anyone see you care." And now she asked. He looked out across the brightening city. Now I know caring is the only kind of power that lasts. Claire smiled, her hand still in his. Then we finally learned the same lesson. He squeezed her fingers gently. Justice and love, they're not so different. Both demand courage. She nodded. And both, once found, change everything. For a long moment, they stood there, watching sunlight ripple over the courthouse steps, the world moving around them, but never quite touching their stillness. It wasn't victory they felt. It was something quieter, deeper vindication for the soul. The news spread faster than either of them expected. Within days, every major paper in Boston ran the same story. Whitmore and Bennett secure landmark win for working families. From boardrooms to courtrooms. How a CEO and his counsel changed the game. For once, the headlines didn't sting, they shone. Claire sat in her small office at the Whitmore Legal Aid Foundation, sunlight spilling across her desk, surrounded by letters, handwritten, imperfect, beautiful letters, thank yous from strangers. A mother wrote, "Because of you, my children have a roof." An older man scrawled, "You made me believe the law still remembers people like us." Claire pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes misting. For years she had chased order, safety, distance, but this was what she had always been searching for. She heard footsteps outside her door and looked up. Ethan stood there, his tie slightly undone, a faint smile softening his face. He looked different now, still composed, still precise, but there was light in his eyes again. The kind that comes when someone finally forgives himself. "You're famous," he said lightly. She laughed softly. "So are you." He stepped in, glancing at the pile of letters. "Fan mail, gratitude mail," she corrected. "They're not thanking me. They're thanking the idea that people can still do good." He nodded slowly, as if committing that thought to memory. "They're thanking you for giving them a reason to believe." For a moment, their eyes met, the silence between them full of history and quiet admiration. Then Ethan's tone shifted. Casual, but purposeful. "There's a small gathering this weekend, just the team, the volunteers, the people who worked on the case. I'd like you to come." "Of course," Claire said. "I wouldn't miss it." He hesitated. "It's on the rooftop. At the firm." "The rooftop?" she asked, surprised. "I didn't know the firm had one." He smiled faintly. "Most people don't. But I think it's time we used it for something that isn't business." Saturday night arrived clear and cool, the kind of Boston evening when the air smelled faintly of sea salt and spring. Claire wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose, her heart beating faster than it should. When the elevator doors opened onto the rooftop, she caught her breath. The city stretched out below in a mosaic of golden light, the Charles River glimmering like silk, the skyline glittering under a crescent moon. Lanterns hung between the railings, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. A few of the foundation's volunteers mingled near the buffet table, their laughter rising gently into the night. Ethan stood near the edge of the terrace, hands in his pockets, gazing out over the skyline. When he turned, his eyes softened at the sight of her. "You made it," he said. "I almost didn't." She teased. "I was afraid it might be another board meeting." He smiled, shaking his head. "No meetings tonight, just gratitude." They mingled with their team, thank yous, laughter, stories from the trial. It was light-hearted, easy. For once, neither of them had to defend or explain anything. Later, as the crowd began to thin and the music softened, Ethan approached her again. "Come with me," he said quietly. He led her to the far corner of the rooftop, where a string of small lights framed the view of the harbor. The air was cool but gentle, brushing against her shoulders like a whisper. Claire folded her arms, smiling. "So, this is where you come to think?" He nodded. "Used to be. Whenever things got loud, I'd stand here and remind myself the city would keep spinning with or without me." She tilted her head, and now he turned toward her, his voice quiet but certain. "Now, I think I'd rather spin with someone beside me. Her heart skipped. Ethan! He stepped closer, his expression suddenly unsure, the confident CEO now replaced by the man she'd come to know in the quiet hours of honesty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, holding it gently in both hands. Claire Bennett, he said, his voice trembling just slightly. I've spent most of my life trying not to make mistakes. But the truth is, the best things that ever happened to me began with one. He smiled soft, almost shy. That email, that photograph, it forced me to see the world again, to see you. Her eyes filled with tears. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant, unpretentious like everything about her. Claire Bennett, he said, his voice breaking into something raw and real. Will you let me make mistakes? Beside you. For the rest of my life, the city seemed to hold its breath. Claire covered her mouth, laughing through her tears. That's the most honest proposal I've ever heard. Is that a yes? He asked, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she touched his face. It's a forever yes. He exhaled shakily, relief flooding through him. He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands still trembling. And then, for the first time, he kissed her not hurriedly, not hidden, but openly, softly, with the quiet certainty of two people who had finally come home. The city lights glittered around them, 1,000 tiny witnesses to a love born not out of perfection, but persistence. When they pulled apart, Claire rested her forehead against his. You know, she whispered, we're still going to make mistakes. He smiled. I'm counting on it. She laughed softly, tears catching the light. Then, let's promise one thing. What's that? That we'll never stop choosing each other, especially on the hard days. Ethan nodded, his voice warm and steady. Deal. Later. As they stood side by side, watching the river shimmer far below, Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you ever think about how far we've come? She murmured. Every day, he said, and every day. I still can't believe I almost lost you. She smiled, eyes on the horizon. Maybe that's how you know it's real. You remember what it cost to find it. He looked down at her, his expression soft. Then, this is the most valuable thing I've ever found. The night deepened, the city glowing below them like a constellation. And as the wind swept gently through the rooftop, their laughter drifted upward, two voices, woven into one quiet promise under the Boston sky. June came to New Hampshire, soft as a hymn, lake water calm, pine boughs sighing, sunlight braided through leaves like ribbon. The wedding wasn't at a manor or a hotel. It was in Eleanor Bennett's backyard, a gentle patch of grass framed by lilac bushes, and a white trellis that Claire and her mother had painted the week before. Folding chairs lined a narrow aisle of crushed seashells. Mason jars held daisies and baby's breath. The air smelled like fresh lemonade and warm soil. Claire Bennett stood in the kitchen with her mother, fingers resting lightly on the sill. Her dress was simple cream linen, a clean boat neckline, a skirt that moved when the wind exhaled, no veil, no glitter. A sprig of lily of the valley tucked behind one ear. Eleanor buttoned the last fastener and kissed her daughter's temple. You look like yourself, she whispered, which was exactly what Claire wanted. Outside, guests gathered co-workers from the foundation, law students who had volunteered late into winter nights, a retired judge with a laugh like gravel. There were faces from cases, the single mother whose apartment had been saved, the veteran who now led a tenants committee, the older man who brought oranges to every hearing. Each wore clothes they owned already and joy like something new. Under the maple by the trellis, Ethan Whitmore checked the knot of his navy tie, then stopped, smiling at himself. He'd learned to let things be imperfect. The ring in his pocket felt warm from his palm. He looked over the crowd and saw pieces of the road that had brought them here. Struggle, mercy, second chances. Lily Monroe waved from the second row with a camera she promised not to overuse. Adam Pierce was not invited, and the absence sat like a clean boundary. Above the trellis, a string quartet tuned carefully, then settled into a slow, familiar jazz standard. The music changed. The back door opened. Claire stepped onto the porch, a hush moving through the guests, the way wind moves through wheat. Ethan's chest lifted, then steadied. He had argued before the hardest benches in Boston. He had never been this close to tears. She walked the seashell aisle alone, choosing the future on her own feet. When she reached him, he took her hands. The world quieted to the warmth of skin. The officiant, a retired judge who now volunteered at the foundation, cleared his throat. "We gather," he said, "to witness a promise between two people who built their love the way they built their work, one honest brick at a time." The lake answered with a glimmer. Somewhere, a loon called. A child giggled, then was gently shushed. It felt perfectly human. Vows came without theatrics. Claire went first, voice steady and low. "Ethan, I spent years thinking love was something you keep tidy. Then I met a man who'd been brave enough to survive himself. You taught me that strength isn't cold. It's warm enough to shelter others. I promised to notice the small things, your late night frown, your early morning hope. I promised to tell the truth kindly. I promised to choose kindness, even when it's hard." A breeze touched the lilacs. Ethan's fingers tightened around her hands. He spoke. "Claire, I thought success meant never slipping. Then a simple photo broke the glass I hid behind. You showed me the difference between control and courage. I promised to listen when silence feels easier. I promised to save the last slice, to bring the umbrella, to leave the lamp on. I promised to protect what we build, not with walls, but with patience. And when I fail, which I will, I promise to repair. With you." A murmur moved through the crowd, recognition, relief. The judge smiled. "Rings," he said. Lily passed them forward in a small wooden dish. Claire slid the plain band onto Ethan's finger, the metal catching morning light. Ethan slid the gold circle onto Claire's hand, where it seemed to belong, as if her skin had been saving the space. Before the pronouncement, the judge looked out at the crowd. "If law is the architecture of fairness, love is the roof that keeps us dry while we argue about it." Laughter. "By the authority of the state of New Hampshire and the authority of every grateful client who wrote them thank you letters, I pronounce you partners, in work and in life." Applause rose like wings. Ethan kissed Claire unhurried, ordinary, holy. The reception felt like a backyard Saturday. Long tables draped in white, potato salad in ceramic bowls, lemon squares dusted with sugar. Marcus, the building's former security guard, wore a tie with little saxophones and manned the grill with priestly focus. The string quartet slipped into a toe-tapping waltz. Then Sophia, now confident and taller, switched to violin and played the same jazz tune from the rooftop night. People danced, not elegantly, but joyfully. Shoes came off in the grass. A toddler toddled between chairs with a cupcake and no plan. Ethan moved from table to table, greeting guests with a softness that would have startled his former board. He thanked a law student for catching a drafting error. He told the veteran that the foundation's next clinic would include a benefits navigator. He asked the single mother about her kid's school play. When she showed him a crumpled program, he put it in his inside pocket like a medal. Claire sat with Eleanor, sharing a plate and little breaths of laughter. When the older man placed a bag of oranges on the gift table lumpy, aromatic, she stood and hugged him. "These saved me once," he said, voice breaking. "Today, they're just dessert." She pressed a palm to his cheek. They were never just dessert. Dusk deepened. Lights warmed the garden into a soft constellation. In a quiet corner, Ethan and Claire stole a minute. He brushed a grass blade from her hem. "How's your shoulder?" he asked. "Strong," she said. "How's your heart?" He smiled. "Softer than it used to be." She tilted her head. "That's how it gets strong." Their first dance wasn't rehearsed. They simply held each other and swayed, slow and easy, the way people do when they know the music will return. Around them, conversations folded into a hush. Lily snapped a single photo, then put the camera down and wiped her eyes. Eleanor leaned against the trellis, hand at her throat, disbelief and gratitude stitched into one expression. When the song ended, the judge lifted a glass. "To ordinary hearts," he said. "To people who learned that dignity and tenderness can live in the same house. May your days be useful and your nights be merciful." Glasses clinked, a loon called again. The lake kept reflecting. Later, after cake and stories and a bouquet that landed in Sophia's surprised hands, the guests formed a corridor of sparklers. Light crackled, smoke curled sweet. Claire and Ethan walked through it slowly, fingers laced, faces lit by 100 small fires. At the gate, Claire stopped and turned. The garden, this patch of earth, looked like a promise kept. She whispered, "Thank you, to everyone and to everything." On the porch, before stepping inside to change shoes and pack leftovers into foil, Ethan touched their foreheads together. "Partners?" he asked, a smile in the question. Claire nodded, ring warm against his palm. "Partners?" she said, all the way home. A year later, the brick building on Tremont Street no longer smelled of fresh paint. It smelled of life coffee, ink, rain on coats, and the faint sweetness of hope. The Whitmore Bennett Legal Aid Center had grown busier than either of them dared to imagine. Every morning, people lined up by the door, tenants with folded letters, veterans with worn folders, young parents with questions, and always, students wide-eyed, restless, ready to learn. Inside, a low hum filled the halls, phones ringing, printers clicking, laughter threading through the seriousness. It wasn't a corporate hum, it was the sound of something good being built, one human act at a time. At the center of it all stood Claire Bennett, clipboard in hand, her hair pulled back, her voice calm but quick as she guided a group of law interns through the maze of desks. "Remember," she said, "every case is a person first. The law only matters if it touches a life." One student raised his hand. "What if we lose, Ms. Bennett?" Claire smiled softly. "Then we lose with honor, and we come back wiser. Justice isn't a finish line, it's a direction." Across the room, Ethan Whitmore watched, arms folded, a quiet pride behind his steady gaze. She moved through the chaos with grace, still the same woman who once questioned her worth in a mirror, yet now leading an entire generation toward the kind of courage she had found. He stepped forward, holding out 2 cups of coffee. "Fuel," he said. She accepted one without looking, automatically, double cream. He grinned. "After a year, you still don't trust me to remember." "Habit," she teased, taking a sip, and smiled when it was perfect. At noon, the center's classroom filled. Dozens of interns gathered for the weekly seminar, notebooks open, eager faces lifted toward the front. Ethan adjusted the projector. A little awkwardly, Claire leaned in. "You could delegate that," she whispered. "I like pretending I'm still useful," he murmured back, earning a laugh. He turned to the room. "When I was your age," he began, "I thought the law was about precision, rules that never bend. Then life introduced me to someone who showed me that rules are tools, not shields." He looked at Claire, and that courage has a softer voice than I ever realized. A ripple of smiles spread through the room. Claire stepped beside him, continuing easily. "The truth is, law is just language. What matters is the heart speaking it." From the back, a young woman, Sophia, now in her first year of law school, raised her hand. "Do you ever get tired?" Claire laughed gently. "Every day." Ethan nodded. "But purpose is the kind of exhaustion you don't regret." Applause followed, unforced and warm. That evening, after the students left and the city dimmed to amber, Claire and Ethan sat in the small break room, papers piled like mountains around them. Rain pattered softly against the windows. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The old firm, the glass walls, the polished silence." He leaned back, thoughtful. "Sometimes. But then I remember what it felt like, how lonely it was up there. I had everything that glittered, and nothing that breathed." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You breathe just fine now." He smiled faintly. That's because you keep reminding me to. They fell quiet, the hum of the rain filling the space between their words. Claire reached across the table and took his hand, thumb brushing the gold band on his finger. You know, she said, this place, these people, they're not just learning the law, they're learning what it means to stay human. Ethan nodded. That's all we ever wanted, isn't it? To make the law a little more human. A knock came at the door. A nervous young man stepped in, holding a folder to his chest. Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Bennett, I just wanted to thank you. My mom got her benefits reinstated today. We thought we'd lost everything. Claire smiled. You did that, not us. He shook his head. I wouldn't have known where to start without this place. When he left, Ethan watched her quietly. They see us as something bigger than we are, he said. Maybe, she answered, or maybe we just remind them what they already have inside. The next morning dawned pale and clear. Claire unlocked the front doors as the first sunlight touched the sign above Whitmore Bennett Legal Aid Center, its silver letters glowing softly. She stood for a moment, breathing in the quiet before the day began. Behind her, Ethan approached, slipping an arm around her waist. Still early for heroics, he murmured. Not for gratitude, she said. They stood side by side, watching the city stir awake, the bakery opening across the street, a bus sighing to a stop, the sound of footsteps beginning their morning rhythm. After a long silence, Ethan spoke softly. Do you ever think about how one wrong click brought us here? She smiled, eyes still on the sign. All the time. He chuckled. Guess we owe technology an apology. Maybe not, she said. Sometimes life's wrong turns are just detours to the right hearts. Her words lingered in the air, tender and certain, as if meant for everyone who'd ever stumbled their way toward grace. Ethan squeezed her hand. You should write that on the wall. She shook her head. No need. It's written in what we do. As the day began, the center filled again, the hum of purpose rising like morning light. A new wave of students arrived with notebooks and nervous smiles. The first client of the day waited near the window, an elderly woman holding a stack of medical bills. Claire walked over, her voice warm. Let's start from the beginning, she said gently. We've got time. Ethan watched from the doorway. The sight never stopped moving him, her patience, her grace, her steady belief that no one was too small to matter. He stepped beside her, taking a chair. Teamwork, she asked. Always, he replied. And there, under the soft hum of conversation and the glow of the sign outside, they began another day not extraordinary, not perfect, but entirely enough. The camera of the world would fade slowly outward now, the line of people waiting at the door, the young interns passing out forms, the sun gilding the letters above Whitmore Bennett Legal Aid Center, two hands, still intertwined, resting on the same table, two hearts that had learned to build justice and love in the same breath. In the end, this story isn't really about a mistaken email or a forbidden romance. It's about how grace can be born from imperfection and how love, at its truest, often begins when we stop pretending to be flawless. Claire and Ethan remind us that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway to connection. When we dare to be seen not polished, not perfect, just real, we invite others to step closer too. Their journey teaches us that redemption doesn't come from erasing our mistakes, but from allowing those mistakes to reshape us into something gentler, wiser, more compassionate. Life rarely follows the path we planned, but sometimes the wrong turns, the missteps, the detours, the accidental messages lead us exactly where our hearts were meant to go. It's never too late to choose kindness, to speak truth softly, and to build something that lasts not on power, but on purpose. So, wherever you are in your journey, remember, every stumble can become a step toward grace, and every ordinary heart still has time to begin again. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey of love, courage, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, made you pause, or reminded you that kindness still matters, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life, tales that celebrate ordinary people, quiet strength, and the beauty of finding light after the storm. Stay with us, because every story we tell carries one simple promise. There's always hope, and it's never too late to begin again. See you in the next story, here on Shining Stories.